February is Black History Month. Books about slavery are legion. However, not many books have been devoted to the topic of free people of color. Around 250,000 free people lived in the South and they made significant contributions. They are truly the forgotten people in the 21st century, but evidence of their existence lives on in documents throughout the South. It is 2013 and the most suppressed history remains persons of color in the Confederate military. I have given presentations about combat support. People have claimed that you cannot find the soldiers. One can find them, but it involves researching service records, census, and Confederate pension records. Unlike the Federal Army, which was segregated, it is difficult to find colored Confederates because they served in integrated units. Quartermasters were responsible for pay, and therefore they had to keep track of combat support because they operated from a budget. They knew how much a private was going to make per month. I attended a memorial dedication for Union County's Confederate pensioners of color last December. Blacks and whites sat together and honored these men. After the service, African Americans kept coming up to me and asking me, why do we not know this history? Because historians do not want you to know it, was my reply. However, it has not deterred people from learning about it or the fact that books are being published about this subject. For an example, at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia, renowned as a shrine to the Confederates in the Confederacy, we find an integrated burial ground amongst the Gettysburg dead. Oh, and by the way, it's also that way at Oakwood Cemetery. Let's fill that out. However, the Union soldiers that were reinterred after the war were in segregated cemeteries. The United States colored troops were buried separately. March is Women's History Month. Women were very important to Confederate history. Many know that they worked in hospitals, made flags, and uniforms. They remained at home taking care of the families and struggled to maintain farms and communities. Under gunfire in the cities and the country, these women had the fortitude to survive. Much has been made about Rosie the Riveter during World War II, but what about the women during the war between the states? The women took on traditional male occupations. For an example, in the archives at the Museum of the Confederacy, there is a commission for a postmistress in Glen Allen, Virginia. Josephine Hopkins continued in this position after the war ended. Women were appointed to work in the Department of Treasury, signing their names to currency. Julia Logan from South Carolina received a Treasury appointment, and her salary was $1,000 per year. It also stipulated that Congress could give her a raise up to $3,000 a year. Astonishing. Women created associations to build gunboats in the South. This is a task that our modern Congress alone assumes. One woman who ran a successful private hospital was made an officer so that she could continue to operate it. Hospitals will come under the command of the military, and to keep Sally Tompkins in that position, Jefferson Davis gave her the rank of captain. While some self-appointed historians have sought to dismiss her rank, the proof lies in the vault of the archives of the Museum of the Confederacy. In the collection, there is an envelope addressed to her as Captain Sally Tompkins from the Virginia Forces. This means that she was not only acknowledged as a captain by the Virginia Forces, but also perhaps more importantly, by the Postal Service. I know this to be true because my father worked for the Postal Service and sorted mail for daily delivery. As an aside, Memorial Day would not exist if it wasn't for Southern women. I was shocked recently when a historian mentioned that it was started in Charleston, South Carolina, and by recently freed people honoring the Union dead. Because of Southern women, we have the Museum of the Confederacy and monuments throughout the South. April is Confederate History Month. We are in the middle of the sesquicentennial of the war between the states. Historians examining the centennial concluded that it was not inclusive, so this was a chance to rectify this issue. This time they are excluding the military leaders. It is great to include everyone, but do not forget there was a war. Military leaders and soldiers were extremely important. Military schools around the world studied the operation of General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson's Valley campaign. The anniversary of Gettysburg campaign is fast approaching. Many books have dissected this battle. However, one book emphasized Lee's retreat from Gettysburg. Kent Masterson Brown's Retreat from Gettysburg explained the logistics of getting the Army back across the Potomac. What was amazing is how Lee brought back an army that had suffered approximately 1/3 casualties, some units more than 90%, and restored the status quo ante with General Meade. Lee's accomplishment was so bad for Meade that Lincoln had to replace him. Tomorrow is Jefferson Davis' birthday. We must not forget that he was the only president of the Confederacy. Mr. Davis had been a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Senator from Mississippi, and U.S. Secretary of War. With these credentials, the delegates felt that he would make an effective president. He was appointed and was eventually voted into office. What a challenge to become a leader of a new nation. In less than 2 months, Davis organized the best military leaders to fight a war. Imagine trying to manage a new country with its various leaders and citizens with their diverse personalities. The other interesting aspect about President Davis is his relationship with enslaved and free people of color. Letters to Davis as well as to his wife Verena are evidence that many of their ex-servants kept in touch with them. I must admit that my curiosity to learn more has increased, and I plan to do more research on these documents on my own time, and I plan on actually writing a whole PowerPoint presentation about that. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are on sacred ground. The soldiers buried here and across the Southland gave the ultimate sacrifice, his very life. Descendants of Southern soldiers should be justifiably proud, but many times I've heard people say that he was just a private. Yes, he may have been a private, but he did his duty. These men fought not only the enemy, but remained loyal to the cause, even though many lacked nourishment and clothing. The men struggled to recover from lost limbs and disease. Others ended up in prison, and many survived by sheer determination. The soldiers who made it home returned to loved ones and gathered the strength to rebuild what had been lost. November is Native American History Month. The main focus of my research is ancestry. Sometimes people will make the statement that their ancestor was an Indian. They expect me to be surprised. However, Native Americans played a significant role in the Confederate history. Historically known as the 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, and Chickasaw all fought hard for the Confederate military. Thomas's Legion consisted of members of the Eastern Band Cherokees as well as Highlanders. Other regiments include the Choctaw and the Chickasaw Mounted Rifles, the 1st and 2nd Creek Infantry, and Daniel's Choctaw Cavalry Battalion. Florida was known as the food suppliers for the Confederate Army. A regiment known as the Cow Cavalry drove and protected cattle so that the beef supply could make it to the Army and prisons. The CSA made a deal to gain Seminoles' loyalty by giving them money and ammunition with the agreement that they would not touch the cattle. The last surrender on land was by General Stan Waddy, a Cherokee chief. According to Eric Richardson, the speaker at Arlington last year, he participated in a program at Bennett Place 2 years ago. He explained that it's not so much a surrender, but a negotiation. He continued by saying that the U.S. government was concerned about treaties between the 5 nations. The implications are still playing out today in the Indian territories, which we now know today as Oklahoma. Even the name of the state shows the lasting impact because Indian territories become Oklahoma within a generation of the ending of the war between the states. The tribes were punished by the federal government for serving on the Confederate side by making their former slave tribal members outside of blood quantum requirements. If one becomes less than 1/4 Indian due to the marriage, one loses tribal membership. The descendants of the free men faced no similar disadvantage. They will always be Indians to the federal government. So, how do we get people to understand that Confederate history is still relevant today? It is a tall order because history is written by the victors. We must continue to have services to honor and remember these men and women, our ancestors. We must continue to talk, read, and discuss Confederate history to the next generation. Most of all, we must work as a community to make sure the public understands the importance of the Confederacy. We are who we are because of the past. There are organizations and individuals who want to erase this history by tearing down monuments and creating a sense of shame in the South. It is heartbreaking to hear people apologizing for being Southern or feeling ashamed of their ancestors. I recently told a group from a Black Baptist church in Richmond that if you wipe out Confederate history, you will wipe out your own history. It caught their attention because it never occurred to them that it would be a possibility. Before they heard this statement, the Reverend could not convince them to visit the Museum of the Confederacy. However, the pastor invited several staff members to visit the church. Having the chance to hear the history of the flags, the role of color bearers, and the importance of people of color to the Confederacy, the church members came to the museum last weekend. They had a chance to view documents and take a tour of the White House of the Confederacy. They left astounded and realized that their history was there as well. Would it not be great if this could happen all over our country? I know that all of you are up to the challenge and will continue to do your best to preserve Confederate history. We owe it to the past, present, and perhaps more important, the future of this nation. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is so relevant today because we have got to figure out a way to keep this history alive. And I do think what we really need to do is to invest in our children. We need to get them interested in history, in our history. We have got to protect this history, and we've got to, protect Southern heritage. And one thing I want to say is God bless the South.
Amen.